Jake Morrison opened his eyes to darkness and the smell of fear. His head pounded like someone had hit him with a hammer, and his mouth tasted like metal. The floor beneath him moved and shook in a way that made his stomach turn over. He tried to sit up, but something heavy pressed against his neck, and when he reached for it, his fingers found cold metal that buzzed with strange energy dot around him in the dark. He could hear other people breathing and crying and whispering and scared. Voices. Someone was throwing up in a corner, and the sound made Jake feel sick too. His memories came back in pieces like broken glass, cutting through his mind. He remembered the attack on New Haven Colony, where he worked in the farms. He remembered the ships that came down from the sky like black metal birds, and the soldiers that poured out of them. The soldiers were not human. They stood 8 feet tall, and their skin looked like armor made of green and brown scales. Their eyes glowed yellow in the dark, and their hands ended in claws that could tear through steel. They moved fast and hit hard, and their weapons made sounds like thunder when they fired. Jake remembered running and hiding and watching his friends die. And then something hit him from behind, and everything went black dot. Now he was here, in this moving prison, with a metal collar around his neck that made his thoughts feel slow and heavy. He could feel anger trying to grow in his chest, but the collar pushed it down and made it weak. The collar was doing something to his mind, and he did not like it, but he could not fight it. A voice spoke from somewhere above them, in words that sounded like rocks grinding together. Then another voice spoke in human words that came from speakers in the walls. The voice was flat and empty, like a machine talking. Human slaves will prepare for arrival at mining facility. You will work in the crystal mines of Zarian Prime. You will follow all orders from Vorthak overseers. Failure to obey will result in punishment or death. You are property of the Vorthak Empire now. Your old life is over. Jake heard people start to cry louder, and someone screamed until their voice broke. A woman near him was rocking back and forth and saying the same prayer over and over. Jake wanted to tell her it would be okay, but he knew it would be a lie, and the collar made it hard to care about anything anyway. The transport ship shook and bumped, and Jake could feel it changing direction. Through small windows near the ceiling, he could see stars moving past, and then a planet came into view. It was gray and brown with no blue or green like Earth had. The planet looked dead and mean, and Jake knew this was where they were going. Hours passed before the ship finally stopped moving, and Jake heard the sound of doors opening. Bright lights came on, and hurt his eyes after so long in the dark. Vorthak. Soldiers came into the holding area, and Jake got his first good look at them. They were even bigger than he remembered, and their armor was thick and black. They carried weapons that hummed with power, and their yellow eyes looked at the humans like they were looking at animals. "Stand up," one of them said through a voice. "Box on its chest. Move to exit. Anyone who falls behind will be left behind." Jake stood up on shaky legs and saw the other prisoners for the first time. There were maybe 200 humans of all ages packed into the space. Men and women, and even some teenagers who looked scared and lost. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and they all had the same metal collars around their necks. Among them, Jake saw a woman with short brown hair who was helping an older man walk. Her name was Lisa Carter, and she had been a teacher on New Haven before the attack. There was also a big man with dark skin named Ben Rodriguez, who had been a construction worker. Jake remembered seeing them both during the attack, but had not known their names then. The Vorthak soldiers pushed them forward with their weapons, and Jake shuffled along with the crowd. They moved through metal corridors that were too tall for humans and too cold for comfort. The air smelled strange and made Jake's nose burn. Finally, they came to a large room where more Vorthak waited for them. One of them was bigger than them. Others and wore red markings on his armor. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, and meaner than the others. I am Sub-Commander Thexfer. You belong to me now. You will work 18 hours each day in the mines. You will sleep 6 hours each day in the barracks. You will eat what we give you when we give it to you. If you work hard, you will live. If you cause trouble, you will die. It is that simple. He walked along the line of prisoners, and Jake could smell something sharp and sour coming from the alien skin. When Thexfer stopped in front of Jake, their eyes met, and Jake felt something stir in his chest, despite the collar. The sub-commander stared at him for a long moment, and Jake stared back without looking away. This one has spirit, Thexfer said to another soldier. We will break that soon enough. Jake was pushed forward with the others toward their new life as slaves. But deep inside him something was already starting to change, even though he did not know it yet. The collar could slow his thoughts and dull his feelings, but it could not stop what was happening to his body. Something in his blood was waking up and getting ready for what was coming next. 3 months had passed since Jake first saw the gray walls of Zarian Prime, and every day had been harder than the last. The work in the crystal mines was meant to break human bodies and spirits, and it did both to most of the prisoners. Jake watched good people become hollow shells of themselves as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months. The gravity on this world was heavier than Earth, and every step felt like walking through thick mud. The air was thin and burned the lungs, and the crystal dust got into everything and made people cough blood. The mining tools were made for Vorthak hands and were too big and heavy for humans to use easily. Most prisoners needed 2 or 3 people working together to operate the drilling machines. But something strange was happening to Jake that he kept hidden from the guards, and even from the guards, and even from the other prisoners. The heavy tools that once made his arms shake with effort now felt lighter in his hands. The long work shifts that left other prisoners gasping and falling down no longer tired him the way they used to. When the Vorthik overseers hit him with their punishment rods, the pain was still there, but it faded faster than it should. Jake noticed the changes slowly at first. He could carry more crystal ore in the transport buckets without his back screaming in pain. He could work longer without needing to rest. When he cut himself on the sharp crystal edges, the wounds closed up quicker than normal. He thought maybe he was just getting used to the work, but deep down, he knew it was something more. One day, while working in the deep tunnels, Jake met Dr. Karen Walsh. She had been a scientist on New Haven, studying how human bodies changed when they lived in harsh places. The Vorthik had captured her because they wanted to know more about human biology so they could make better slaves. Now she worked in the mines like everyone else, but she still remembered her training. Karen was small and had gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She watched Jake work and saw things that others did not see. She noticed how he moved the heavy equipment by himself when he thought no one was looking. She saw how his breathing stayed steady when other prisoners were gasping for air. She watched the way cuts and bruises healed on his skin. "You are different," she whispered to him one day when they were alone in a side tunnel. "Your body is changing in ways that should not be possible." Jake looked around to make sure no guards were near, and then told her what he had been feeling. Karen listened and asked him questions about his family and his past. She learned that Jake's grandfather had been a soldier who survived terrible battles, and his great-grandmother had lived through a famine that killed thousands of other people. "Some humans have old genes that sleep until they are needed," Karen explained. "Genes that helped our ancestors survive when things got very bad. The stress and danger here might be waking up those genes in you." That night in the barracks, Jake lay on his thin mat and thought about what Karen had said. Around him other prisoners slept fitfully, and some cried in their sleep. The barracks were overcrowded and cold and smelled like sweat and fear and sickness. The metal collar around his neck still made his thoughts slow, but he could feel something fighting against it now. The next day brought horror that Jake would never forget. An old prisoner named Frank Davis collapsed while carrying ore buckets up from the deep mines. Frank was thin and weak and had been coughing blood for weeks. He fell on the rocky ground and could not get back up no matter how hard he tried. Commander Dexfer came to see what was causing the delay. He looked down at Frank with disgust and spoke in his grinding voice. "This one is broken and useless. It will serve as example to others." Dexfer raised his massive foot and brought it down on Frank's head. The sound was wet and final, and Frank stopped moving forever. The other prisoners screamed and cried, but the guards hit them with shock rods until they were quiet again. Jake felt something explode inside his chest, like a bomb going off. Rage filled him from his toes to the top of his head, and the metal collar around his neck began to spark and smoke. The buzzing energy that kept his thoughts dull started to fade, and for the first time in months, Jake could think clearly. He wanted to attack Vex 4 right there, but Karen grabbed his arm and held him back. Her touch was like ice water on his burning anger, and helped him remember that he would only get himself and others killed if he acted now. "Not yet," she whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "You are not ready yet." That night Jake found Lisa Carter and Ben Rodriguez and a few other prisoners who still had fight left in them. He told them about the changes in his body and about what Karen had discovered. Lisa had been helping other prisoners stay alive by sharing food and water and treating their injuries. Ben had been watching the guards and learning their routines and weak points. "We need to escape," Jake said, "all of us together. The callers will stop us," Ben said. "They track where we go and control what we think." "Not mine," Jake said, and showed them how his collar was cracked and damaged from the surge of anger he had felt. "It is breaking down. Maybe I can break yours too." Jake reached out and touched Ben's collar. He felt electricity flow through his fingers and into the metal band. The collar sparked and went dark, and Ben's eyes suddenly became clearer and more focused. "I can think again," Ben said in wonder. "The fog in my head is gone." One by one, Jake disabled the collars of the small group of prisoners. Each time it got easier, and the electricity that flowed from him got stronger. Karen studied what he was doing and shook her head in amazement. "Your body is generating some kind of electromagnetic field," she said. "The Vorthic technology cannot handle it." They began to plan their escape carefully and quietly. Lisa would help get the other prisoners ready to move when the time came. Ben would figure out how to get past the guards and reach the transport ships. Karen would gather medical supplies and equipment they would need. But Jake was changing faster now, and he could feel something big coming. His strength was growing every day, and his senses were getting sharper. He could see in the dark tunnels without any light and hear the guards coming from far away. His hands were getting harder and stronger, and when he gripped the mining tools too tight, he left dents in the metal. The Vorthic had made slaves of humans for many years and thought they knew everything about them. But they had never seen a human like Jake before. They had never faced someone whose body could adapt and evolve under pressure. They thought humans were weak, but they were about to learn how wrong they could be. The resistance group grew slowly over the next few weeks as Jake freed more prisoners from their collars. Danny Cooper joined them first because he had been a Marine before the capture and knew about fighting and tactics. Helen Brooks came next because she was an engineer who understood how the mining facility worked and where all the important systems were located. Jake's body kept changing in ways that amazed and frightened even Karen. He could now see perfectly, in complete darkness, and his hearing was so good He could hear conversations through thick walls. His strength had grown to the point where he could lift equipment that normally required 3 people to move. When he gripped metal tools too hard, they bent and twisted in his hands like soft clay. The most frightening change was his speed. Jake could move faster than human eyes could follow when he needed to. Once when a guard surprised him in a tunnel, Jake reacted so quickly that the Vorthix soldier did not even see him move before Jake was behind him. Jake had to pretend to stumble and fall to hide what had really happened. Danny taught the group basic combat moves and showed them how to use mining tools as weapons. Helen drew maps of the facility from memory and marked where the power systems and communication arrays were located. Lisa organized the other prisoners into small groups that could move quickly when the escape began. Karen kept studying Jake's changes and trying to understand what was happening to him. "Your cellular structure is completely different now," she told him after examining a small sample of his blood. "Your muscles are denser and your bones are harder. Your nervous system is processing information much faster than normal human brains can handle. I think you are becoming something new." The plan was simple but dangerous. Helen would lead a small team to disable the main power grid while Danny's group attacked the guard barracks. Jake would go after the communication array to stop the facility from calling for help. Lisa would lead the other prisoners to the transport ships while all this was happening. They chose a night when most of the guards would be resting and the facility would be running on minimum staff. Jake felt excited and nervous as the time approached. He had been a farmer before the attack on New Haven and had never been in a real fight in his life. But the thing growing inside him was not afraid of fighting, and it wanted to hurt the aliens who had killed Frank, and so many others. The plan started well. Helen's team reached the power station without being detected and began working on the electrical systems. Danny's group moved toward the guard barracks using service tunnels that Helen had shown them. Jake made his way toward the communication center, moving through shadows like a ghost, but someone had betrayed them. Jake never found out who it was, but when he reached the communication array, Vorthix soldiers were already waiting for him. Bright lights came on all around him, and he heard the whining sound of energy weapons charging up. Sub-Commander Thexfer stepped out from behind a metal pillar with a cruel smile on his face. "Did you think we were stupid, human?" Thexfer said. "We have been watching you and your friends for days. We know about your broken collar and your little resistance group." More soldiers appeared from hiding places around the facility. Jake could hear shooting and screaming from where Danny's team had been, and he knew his friends were in trouble. The trap had been complete and perfect, and now they were all going to die. "Bring me the other rebels," Thexfer ordered his soldiers. "We will execute them all in front of the other slaves as an example." Jake watched in horror as the soldiers dragged in his friends. Danny had been shot and was bleeding badly from wounds in his chest. Helen had bruises on her face where they had hit her. Lisa was crying and trying to help Danny, but the guards pushed her away with their shock rods. "You will watch them die slowly," Thexfer said to Jake. "Then we will dissect you to see what makes you different from the others. Our scientists are very curious about your broken collar and your strength." The first soldier raised his weapon toward Danny's head. Jake felt something snap inside his mind, like a cable breaking under too much weight. The damaged collar around his neck began to smoke and spark as electricity coursed through it. Then it cracked apart and fell to the ground in pieces. For the first time in months, Jake could think completely clearly. His mind felt sharp and fast and focused like a blade. But more than that, he could feel the full power of what his body had become. Strength flowed through his muscles like liquid fire, and his senses became so sharp he could hear the heartbeats of everyone around him. "Kill the Marine," Thexfer ordered. The soldier pulled the trigger, and Danny fell to the ground with a smoking hole in his chest. He looked at Jake with dying eyes and whispered something that sounded like "make them pay." Before the light went out of his face forever, Jake screamed with rage and grief, and the sound that came out of him was not entirely human anymore. He moved faster than the Vorthic soldiers could track, and grabbed the nearest one by the throat. His fingers crushed through the alien's armor like it was made of paper, and he felt bones breaking under his grip. The soldier's weapon fired wildly. As Jake lifted him off the ground and threw him into a wall hard enough to leave a crater in the metal, the other guards started shooting, but Jake was already moving, and their energy beams hit empty air where he had been standing. Jake reached the second guard before the alien could reload his weapon. He grabbed the soldier's armored head in both hands and squeezed until he heard the skull cracking inside the helmet. The guard dropped his weapon and clawed at Jake's hands, but it was like trying to break steel cables with fingernails. Sub-Commander Dexver backed away from Jake with fear in his yellow eyes. He had never seen a human move like this or display this kind of raw physical power. Dexver raised his own weapon and fired directly at Jake's chest, but the energy beam barely slowed him down. Jake felt the heat from the energy blast, but his skin did not burn the way it should have. His body absorbed the energy and converted it into more strength and speed. He reached Dexver in 2 quick steps and grabbed the sub-commander's weapon arm. "You killed my friend," Jake said, and his voice sounded different now, deeper and more dangerous. "Now you die." Jake twisted Dexver's arm until the bones snapped and the alien dropped his weapon. Then he picked up the 8-foot-tall Vorthic and slammed him down on the metal floor hard enough to dent it. Dexver tried to speak, but Jake's hand was around his throat now and squeezing slowly. The other guards had stopped shooting and were backing away from Jake in terror. They had never seen anything like this before, and their training had not prepared them for fighting something that could tear through their armor with bare hands. Jake looked around at his friends and saw that Danny was dead, but the others were still alive. The rage inside him was still burning, but he forced himself to think clearly. They needed to escape before more guards arrived, and they needed to do it now. "Get to the ships," he told Lisa and Helen and Karen. "I will hold them off." But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The Vorthic had made the mistake of pushing him too far, and now they were going to learn what humans were really capable of when they had nothing left to lose. Jake told his friends to run, but he was not planning to just hold off the guards. The death of Danny had awakened something savage and terrible inside him, and now it wanted blood. He could feel power flowing through his body like electricity, through wires, and every instinct told him to hunt and kill until nothing was left that could threaten the people he cared about. The remaining Vorthic soldiers tried to surround him, but Jake moved too fast for their tactics to work. He grabbed one guard by the leg and swung him like a club into 2 others, sending all 3 crashing into the wall. Their armor cracked and bent under the impact, and Jake could hear bones breaking inside the metal suits. More guards came running from other parts of the facility, but Jake was ready for them. When they fired their energy weapons, he dodged the beams and closed the distance before they could reload. His hands had become like hammers that could crush alien metal and break alien bones. His speed made him almost impossible to hit, and his strength made every blow devastating. Jake ripped the helmet off one soldier and saw the reptilian face underneath with its yellow eyes wide with terror. The guard tried to speak, but Jake's fist went through its skull before any words could come out. Green blood splattered on the walls, and the headless body fell to the ground, twitching. The facility's alarm system began wailing as more Vorthic troops poured into the area. Jake could hear vehicles starting up outside and knew that reinforcements would be coming soon. But he was not afraid anymore. The thing he had become felt like it could fight forever and win against any number of enemies. A squad of guards in heavy armor came around the corner. carrying weapons that hummed with dangerous energy. These were not the normal facility guards, but elite soldiers sent to deal with the emergency. Their armor was thicker, and their weapons were bigger, and they moved with the confidence of troops who had never been defeated. Jake charged directly at them, and their leader fired a plasma cannon that could have melted through tank armor. Superheated energy hit Jake in the chest and knocked him backward, but did not penetrate his skin. Instead, his body absorbed the energy, and his muscles swelled with new power. The elite soldiers stared in shock as Jake got back up without even a burn mark on his clothes. Their training had not prepared them for fighting something that could walk through their most powerful weapons. Jake could smell their fear through their armor, and it made the predator inside him even hungrier. He reached the first soldier before the alien could fire again and grabbed the plasma cannon in both hands. The weapon was built to withstand enormous pressures and temperatures, but Jake's grip crushed it like an empty can. Sparks and molten metal flew everywhere as the cannon collapsed in his fingers. The soldier tried to draw a sidearm, but Jake backhanded him across the helmet. The blow sent the 8-foot-tall alien flying 20 feet through the air to crash into a support pillar. The pillar cracked and bent under the impact, and the soldier did not get back up. Jake turned to face the other elite troops and saw something he had never seen before in Vorthic eyes. They were afraid of him. These aliens who had conquered worlds and enslaved entire species were backing away from one human with his bare hands. He did not give them time to overcome their fear. Jake moved through the squad like death itself, tearing apart armor and breaking bodies with mechanical efficiency. His hands punched through metal plates, and his grip crushed weapons into scrap. The aliens tried to coordinate their attacks, but Jake was too fast and too strong and too angry to be stopped. Within minutes, all the elite soldiers were dead or dying on the floor around him. Jake stood in the middle of the carnage, breathing hard and feeling more alive than he ever had in his life. The facility's lights flickered as damaged power systems struggled to keep working, and the air was full of smoke and sparks and the smell of alien blood. That was when Jake heard the sound of engines overhead and knew that the real fight was about to begin. Through the windows he could see Vorthake aircraft circling the facility like metal vultures. Admiral Kexmore had arrived with his fleet to deal with what the reports were calling an impossible situation. The Admiral had commanded Vorthik fleets for over a century and had crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds. He had orbital weapons that could level cities and enough firepower to reduce the entire facility to atoms. But the security footage he was watching showed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about inferior species. Jake had killed over 30 Vorthik soldiers, including an entire squad of elite troops. He had done it with his bare hands, while taking direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized him. The human moved faster than their targeting systems could track, and hit harder than their armor could withstand. "Impossible," Admiral Kexmore said as he watched Jake tear apart a battle mech that had been sent to stop him. "Humans are weak creatures. This must be some kind of trick or illusion," but his sensors confirmed what his eyes were seeing. One human was single-handedly destroying a military facility that housed over 1,000 Vorthik troops. The human's body temperature was increasing beyond normal limits, and his movements were generating electromagnetic fields that interfered with Vorthik technology. Jake found his friends in the transport hangar, where Lisa was helping other prisoners board captured Vorthik ships. Karen was treating wounded humans, while Helen worked to get the alien systems running. They looked at Jake with a mixture of relief and fear as he approached them covered in green blood and moving with predatory grace. "We need to leave now," Helen sighed. "Their fleet is in orbit, and they will start bombing soon." "Let them come," Jake said, and his voice had changed again, becoming deeper and more dangerous. "I am not running anymore. Karen looked at him with scientific curiosity mixed with concern. Jake, your body temperature is over 110 degrees, and your cellular activity is off the charts. Whatever is happening to you is accelerating. Jake could feel the changes too. His strength was still growing, and his senses were becoming so sharp that he could hear the heartbeats of people on the other side of the facility. His body was adapting to every threat and becoming something that could survive in any environment and defeat any enemy. The first orbital bombardment began as pillars of energy struck the facility from space. The beams were meant to level the entire complex, but Jake was no longer inside when they hit. He had moved faster than the targeting computers could track and was already in one of the captured transport ships. "Take the other prisoners to safety," he told Lisa. "I have work to finish here." Jake piloted the stolen ship up through the atmosphere toward the waiting Vorthic fleet. Admiral Kexmore watched in disbelief as the small transport craft approached his flagship without any shields or weapons. The human was coming to fight an entire battle fleet with nothing but his bare hands and his impossible will to survive. "This ends now," Jake said to himself as he prepared to board the enemy flagship. The Vorthic Empire had enslaved and murdered his people for the last time. Now they would learn what happened when you pushed humanity too far and created something that could not be stopped or reasoned with or defeated. The real war was just beginning. News of what happened at Xerion Prime spread through the Vorthic Empire like a disease. Admiral Kexmore's report to the Imperial Council spoke of impossible things that challenged everything they believed about humans and their place in the galaxy. A single human had destroyed an entire military facility and was now attacking warships with his bare hands. Emperor Vextalon had ruled the Vorthic Empire for over 2 centuries and had seen the rise and fall of countless species. He sat on his throne made from the bones of enemies and listened to reports that grew more unbelievable with each transmission. Humans were supposed to be weak creatures, useful only as slaves and laborers. They had been conquered easily and showed no signs of evolution or adaptation. But the security footage from Xerion Prime showed something different. The human called Jake Morrison moved faster than Vorthic eyes could follow and struck with enough force to crush battle armor. Energy weapons that could melt steel barely slowed him down, and he seemed to grow stronger with each fight. Worse still, reports were coming in from other slave worlds of similar incidents. On the mining colony of Ov, Kethver 3 humans had broken free from their neural collars and killed 40 guards before disappearing into the wilderness. On the factory world of Zextal, an entire production facility had gone silent after prisoners somehow overpowered their overseers. Across the Empire, humans were changing and fighting back in ways that should not have been possible. Jake's stolen transport ship approached Admiral Kexmore's flagship, and the Admiral prepared to destroy it with weapons that could crack moons. But when the targeting systems locked onto the small craft, they suddenly went dead, as if something was jamming them. The ship's own computers began failing one by one as Jake drew closer. "What is happening to our systems?" the Admiral demanded. But his technicians had no answers. Every piece of Vorthic technology within a certain distance of the human simply stopped working properly. It was as if Jake's presence generated some kind of field that disrupted their most advanced equipment. Jake did not try to land the transport ship gently. Instead, he crashed it directly into the flagship's hangar bay with enough force to buckle the armored deck plating. Vorthic soldiers rushed to the crash site expecting to find a dead human, but instead they found Jake walking out of the wreckage without a scratch on him. The soldiers opened fire with everything they had, but their weapons either missed completely or struck Jake without doing any visible damage. He moved through their formation like a force of nature, grabbing aliens by their armored throats and crushing them like insects. Their screams echoed through the ship's corridors as word spread. that the impossible human was aboard. Jake fought his way through deck after deck of the massive warship, leaving destruction in his wake. Blast doors that could stop tank shells crumpled under his fists. Security barriers that could withstand orbital bombardment collapsed when he pushed against them. The ship itself seemed to groan and shake under the violence of his passage. Admiral Kexmore sent his personal guard to stop the human, but they returned as corpses or not all. He deployed battle mechs designed to fight other starships in close combat, but Jake tore them apart with his bare hands. Every weapon and tactic that had conquered 100 worlds proved useless against one evolved human. Emperor Vex Talon watched the real-time reports from his palace on the homeworld and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear. Not the simple concern of facing a dangerous enemy, but the deep terror of encountering something beyond understanding or control. The human was not just strong or fast or tough. He was becoming something that their science could not explain and their weapons could not stop. "Bring me General Rex Vulan," the Emperor commanded. "Send the Crimson Talons to end this before it spreads further." General Rex Vulan commanded the most elite unit in the Vorthic military. The Crimson Talons were genetically enhanced soldiers equipped with experimental weapons and armor. They had never lost a battle and had personally conquered 12 worlds for the Empire. If anyone could stop this impossible human, it would be them. Jake reached the command deck of Admiral Kexmore's flagship after cutting through the ship's crew like wheat before a scythe. The Admiral himself waited in his command chair, surrounded by the last of his officers. He was old and scarred from many battles, and his eyes held the hardness of someone who had killed thousands without mercy. "You cannot be real," the Admiral said as Jake approached. "Humans are inferior beings. You should not be able to do these things." "Your Empire made one mistake," Jake replied, and his voice carried harmonics that made the ship's hull vibrate. "You thought breaking our bodies would break our spirits. But humans get stronger when you try to destroy us." The fight between Jake and Admiral Kexmore lasted only seconds. The Admiral had cybernetic enhancements that made him faster and stronger than normal Vorthic, but Jake had become something beyond the limits of known biology. When it was over, the Admiral's broken body lay at Jake's feet, and the flagship's command systems were under human control. Jake broadcast a message across the Empire using the ship's communication array. His image appeared on screens throughout Vorthic space, showing a human who looked calm and confident despite being covered in alien blood. "I am Jake Morrison," he said. "Your Empire has enslaved my people and murdered my friends. Every human death will be repaid with interest. Every act of cruelty will be answered with justice. You created me when you refused to let us live in peace. Now you will face the consequences." The message sent panic through the Vorthic government. Emergency sessions were called, and military commanders were summoned from across the Empire. But even as they planned their response, more reports came in of human uprisings on slave worlds. It was as if Jake's transformation had triggered something in the human genetic code that was spreading to others of his species. General Rex Vulan arrived with a fleet of 50 ships and an army of Crimson Talon warriors. He was confident that superior numbers and advanced technology would overcome whatever advantage this human possessed. But when his scouts approached Jake's captured flagship, their own systems began failing in the same mysterious way. "It does not matter," the general said. "We will board his ship and kill him with blade and claw if necessary. No single being can stand against the might of the Crimson Talons." But Jake was no longer the same person who had awakened in chains on a transport ship months ago. He had become something new and terrible and unstoppable. His body had adapted to every threat and overcome every limitation. The scared farmer was gone, and in his place stood something that could break empires with its bare hands. A final battle for the freedom of humanity. was about to begin, and Jake was ready for it. The Vorthik had created him through their cruelty, and now they would face the consequences of pushing the human spirit too far. Some mistakes could not be undone, and some enemies could not be defeated by force alone. The Empire was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. Emperor Vextalon stared at the reports flooding in from across his empire and felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him. 50 slave worlds had gone silent in the past week, and human uprisings were spreading faster than his military could respond. The impossible human Jake Morrison had become a symbol that was inspiring his entire species to fight back against their oppressors. The Emperor's advisors spoke of negotiation and compromise, but Vextalon had not built an empire by showing weakness to inferior species. Still, the reports of what this human could do challenged everything he believed about the natural order. No single being should have been able to tear apart starships with bare hands or survive weapons that could level cities. General Rex Vulin's assault on Jake's captured flagship had ended in disaster. The Crimson Talons had boarded the ship confident in their superior training and equipment, but Jake had torn through them like paper. Their experimental armor meant nothing to someone who could crush steel with his fingers. Their enhanced genetics were no match for whatever the human had become. Jake felt the changes in his body accelerating as each battle pushed him further beyond normal human limits. He could now survive in the vacuum of space for extended periods, and his strength had grown to the point where he could punch through starship hulls. The electromagnetic field his body generated was so powerful that Vorthik technology simply stopped working in his presence. But the most frightening change was how his mind had adapted to process information and react to threats. He could track dozens of enemies simultaneously and predict their movements before they made them. Combat had become as natural to him as breathing, and he felt no fatigue or doubt what needed to be done. The Emperor made his final decision when Jake's message reached the throne world itself. The human had hijacked the Empire's own communication networks and was broadcasting to every Vorthik citizen and every human slave. His words were simple, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Your Emperor will face me in single combat, or I will come to his palace and tear it down stone by stone. The choice is his, but the result will be the same. The Vorthik Empire ends today. Vextalon had ruled through fear and brutality for over 2 centuries, but he was not a coward. If this human wanted to face him, then he would oblige. The Emperor had genetic modifications that made him stronger than any normal Vorthik and weapons that had been crafted by the Empire's greatest scientists. He would prove that no inferior species could challenge the natural order. Jake approached the Vorthik homeworld of Vextorium alone, walking through space as easily as he once walked through cornfields. The planet's orbital defense platforms fired everything they had at him, but the energy beams passed through him harmlessly. His body had learned to absorb and redirect any form of energy attack. The capital city of the Empire stretched across an entire continent with buildings that reached toward the clouds and defensive walls that had never been breached. Vorthik citizens watched from their windows as a single human descended from the sky like a falling star. He landed in the palace courtyard with enough force to crack the ancient stone, but walked away from the crater without injury. Jake fought his way through the palace guards with methodical efficiency. These were the elite troops that protected the Emperor himself, but they fell before him like wheat before a harvest. Their weapons could not harm him, and their armor could not protect them from his strength. He left a trail of broken bodies and twisted metal as he made his way to the throne room. Emperor Vextalon waited on his throne of bones, wearing armor that had been forged from the cores of dead stars. In his hands he held weapons that channeled the power of black holes and could unmake matter at the molecular level. Around him stood the last of his personal guard, and the greatest warriors the Empire had ever produced. "So you are the impossible human," the Emperor said, as Jake entered the vast chamber. "You are smaller than I expected for someone who claims he can destroy empires." "Empires are just ideas," Jake replied, walking steadily toward the throne. "Ideas can be broken as easily as bones." The final battle began when the Emperor fired weapons that should have erased Jake from existence. But the human absorbed the impossible energies and converted them into more strength and speed. He moved through the Emperor's guard, like death itself breaking their weapons and crushing their bodies with casual ease. Emperor Vex Talon had enhanced his body with technology that made him faster and stronger than any natural Vorthic, but Jake had become something beyond the limits of any known species. When they finally faced each other in single combat, the outcome was never really in doubt. The fight destroyed most of the throne room as Jake and the Emperor crashed through walls and pillars in their struggle. The Emperor's enhanced claws left scratches on Jake's skin, but could not penetrate deep enough to cause real damage. Jake's fists shattered the Emperor's armor and broke bones that had been reinforced with alien metals. In the end, Jake held the dying Emperor in his hands while the palace collapsed around them. Vex Talon looked up at him with eyes that finally showed understanding along with the fear. "What are you?" the Emperor whispered. "I am what you made me," Jake said. "I am what humans become when you push us too far." He crushed the Emperor's throat and let the body fall among the rubble of the fallen throne. The Vorthic Empire had ended not with the destruction of fleets or the conquest of worlds, but with the death of one tyrant at the hands of someone who refused to stay broken. Jake stood alone in the ruins of the Imperial Palace and felt the weight of what he had become. The scared farmer from New Haven was gone, forever replaced by something that could reshape galaxies with its bare hands. But despite all the changes in his body and mind, he remembered why he had fought and who he had been fighting for. Across the Empire Vorthic world surrendered rather than face the wrath of the impossible human. Human slaves were freed, and Vorthic citizens fled to distant systems, hoping to escape the judgment that was coming. The news networks spoke of the end of an age and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. Jake walked through the capital city as Vorthic civilians fled before him. They had supported an empire built on slavery and conquest, and now they faced the consequences of their choices. But he did not pursue them or seek revenge beyond what justice demanded. The empire was broken, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Jake reunited with Lisa and Karen and the other humans who had survived the mining facility. They looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty because they could see that he was no longer entirely human. He had become something new and powerful and unknowable. "What happens now?" Lisa asked as they stood together watching. "Former Vorthic warships being converted to carry human refugees home. Now we rebuild," Jake said. "We make sure this never happens again to any species anywhere in the galaxy." He had crushed an empire with his bare hands, but the hardest work was still ahead. Building something better than what had come before would take more than strength and speed and the ability to survive any weapon. It would take wisdom and patience and the kind of hope that could survive even the darkest times. Jake looked up at the stars and thought about the future. Somewhere out there, other species might be planning conquest and enslavement. They would learn what the Vorthic had learned too late. Humans could be pushed and broken and enslaved, but they could also evolve and adapt and become something that no force in the universe could stop. The galaxy had seen the birth of something new and terrible and wonderful. The age of empires was ending, and the age of humanity was about to begin.